Basing FromSoft builds off of other games and characters has always been enjoyable to me, and for this build I decided to draw inspiration from one of my favorite games, Skyrim. I feel like most people have played Skyrim, but just in case, you play as the Dragonborn and throughout the game you slay dragons and consume their power. And that's exactly what I'll be doing for this playthrough. There are many dragons in the game, and by consuming their hearts at a dragon altar I can acquire more and more power from the dragons I defeat. With that said, here are the rules of the run. The new build I'm starting is referred to as the Dragon Mimic. For this build and playthrough I'll be using only the Dragon Communion Incantations and the grafted dragon weapon. Lansseax Ruin isn't technically a communion spell, but I'll still be using it because it creates the dragon head on cast, which is the real draw to these spells. The goal of this run is not only to beat the game, but I must also defeat every dragon and collect each one of their hearts. The idea behind the Dragon Mimic is similar to the Dragonborn from Skyrim, where I'm killing dragons to absorb their powers. However, I'm only using the powers that spawn the heads and arms of the dragons, and not the lightning spells that are used by a lot of them. Starting off this run, I kinda have to break the rules right away. I can't actually get a dragon heart unless I kill a dragon or spawn one in with cheats. I decided I would just use some other weapon and kill Egil, since he's the easiest dragon to take down at the start of the game. I opted to run all the way to Liurnia and grab the Ice Rhine Hatchet. The reason I chose this weapon is due to the description. Its blade is thought to be a dragon scale, so it kinda ties into the build for the first kill. After that, I head over to the first dragon, and after some hits on my horse, I collect his heart. Then I head over to Caelid to the Dragon Church, and there I obtain my first incantation. I unequip everything else and test some damage on a beginning boss. I try to fight Margit with the little prep I've done, and it wasn't going well. Didn't quite have the damage I needed, so I went and grabbed the Dragon Communion seal in the Stranded Graveyard. Didn't really want to deal with fighting the knight that drops it, so I got the chariot to do the work. The seal is essential to this build because it boosts Dragon Communion Incantations. I also killed a few random bosses for some runes. Went back and challenged Margit. In order to maximize damage, there's something you can do with the breath attacks to squeeze out almost double damage. If you barrel stuff the boss with your attack, it applies more ticks of the damage. This is a mechanic I'll need to make full use of in later boss fights. Due to the long casting speed, I can only attack on certain moves. I don't have a lot of health or healing flasks, so I needed to minimize the risk of taking damage. If I couldn't barrel stuff him, I would stand far away and shoot a short breath just to do some damage. With my last breath, I take out Margit. Afterward, I killed a few more world bosses because I'm gonna need more levels to take on Godric. Godric is the first demigod I'll be fighting. After some time breathing fire, we ended our first fight in a draw. Due to his slow death, I ended up having to fight him again. The fight wasn't too bad as long as I gauged my distance from the boss correctly. I spent most of the time firing single breaths from a distance. The start of the second phase was a great chance to deal damage. I can run up to him and point blank dragon fire for a chunk of his health. The rest of this half is easier because of all the fire attacks used. After killing Godric, I went to get the grafted dragon, but quickly decided I didn't want to use it. I felt like the dragon powers would be enough for the playthrough, which I needed to get more of. Headed off to fight the glintstone dragon in Liurnia. I take advantage of his wake up animation to get in a full dragon fire on his head. I try my best to keep the attacks as close to his head as possible. If I can't get a long burst on his head, I switch to his body to at least do some damage. Once the dragon is dead, I use his heart to get another dragon spell. Now, there are many bosses that are resistant to elemental damage, so I wanted to make sure I have a spell that does physical damage. I grabbed Dragon Claw. This spell can do one slam and then a follow-up slam if it's used in succession with the first slam for some more damage. However, if you have a seal in each hand, you can use a cooler succession of attacks. This alternating method has a shorter recovery time compared to using the spell normally. This attack is one of the reasons I decided not to use the grafted dragon, because I think having two dragon arms makes more sense. With the spells, I go and get another easy dragon heart from the magma worm in Caelid. I could kill the sleeping dragon, but I wanted to wait a bit for that. The magma worm is weak to physical attacks, so I use the dragon claw on his head for the most damage and to periodically stun him. Afterwards, I go back to the church and grab one of the strongest spells for this run, which is Rotten Breath. I grab the memory stone and converted tower and head over to Rhea Lucario so I can try out the new OP spell. Rotten Breath is great for fighting the Red Wolf of Radagon because this boss moves around so much. I start off by routing the boss and spend the rest of the fight dodging his attacks. I fight him this way because he is super annoying to hit with all the jumping he does, and the long cast times of the spells don't work the best against a really quick boss. I finish off the last of his health and quickly press on to Renala. I used Dragon Claw to take down the shield. When the shield was down, I made sure to use Rotten Breath because even if I can't one-face her, she will still take damage while in her shield. Each time I fight Renala, I seem to find out new things about the fight. Last time I learned Volcano Pots don't do damage to the shield even after killing one of the singing enemies. This time I learned that Renala can't be killed from rot or poison while in her sphere. Each tick for the rot was doing 24 damage, but on the very last tick before the rot stopped was only 3. This shows that the game won't let her die from rot this way and leaves her with 1 HP while simultaneously curing her of her rot. Once she is one hit, I take out the shield again and move on to the second phase. Goal here is to rot her again and dodge her spells. After some time, the rot runs out and I need to reapply. I try reapplying the rot, but it doesn't work and the boss is left with 1 HP. I don't have any more FP, so I need to do it again. I get through the first phase again, and this time in the second phase, I start off with a Dragon Claw and follow up with Rotten Breath. I've done enough damage with the 2 breaths, and the rot does its job and finishes off Renala's health. There's another easy worm I can kill at the top of Ruin-Strewn Precipice. Mabberworm Makar starts out the same as the previous Mabberworm I fought earlier. This time, however, I use Rotten Breath to get that tick damage going. After that, I switch to Dragon Claw and start smacking away. After a few slams on his head, he gets stunned, which allows for more follow-up Dragon Claws. He took so much damage while being stunned that I forgot he had a second phase where he stands up. Wherever I was positioned, I couldn't get out, so he just ended up dying to the rot. Afterwards, I took the Dragon Heart and grabbed Dragon Ice. Also, I don't know if everyone knows, but once you've consumed enough Dragon Hearts, your eyes start changing into that of dragons. Nice little detail for this build. Next, I ran through Caria Manor and fought Royal Knight Loretta. This boss actually took me a while to beat. I felt like I had to keep moving most of the fight, so trying to get out a long casting spell was tough. The little amount of health I currently have doesn't help either. After some time, I decided I was just going to use Dragon Claw the whole fight. I get 2 off at the start of the fight while taking a hit. From then, I tried waiting until she would summon her Glint Blades or use her glowing halberd attack. These attacks were just long enough for me to counterattack. I went risky at the end here being low health, but committing to the attack anyways. The fight took me 8 tries, so I'm pretty sure the hardest bosses of this playthrough will be the ones that are immune to status effects, like Scarlet Rot. Now, there are a few quest lines and optional areas I need to do in order to reach some of the dragons for this build. I head over to Ranni and start her quest because I'll need to finish off Adula in another area that is unlocked later in Ranni's quest. Once I've joined with Ranni, I converse with her followers in a few areas so I can get the Radahn Festival started. I then decided I wanted to add a few levels, and I knew the perfect 2 Caelid bosses to fight. First up, I fought the Putrid Avatar, which awards 91,000 runes. I began with Dragon Ice to cause Frostbite. Then the goal was to get behind him as much as possible and punish his attacks with a point-blank Dragon Fire. The extra ticks of damage combined with the boss's weakness to fire makes the chipping away at his health a lot easier. After some time, I got my runes and used them for more health. Next, I went to kill the giant sleeping dragon. I just stand behind her wings so the other dragons can't get to me, and I used a combination of the Scarlet Rot and Frostbite to deplete her health bar. Now, I could have done this a lot earlier in the run because this boss also gives 5 Dragon Hearts when she dies. The reason I didn't is simply because I didn't want to. I wanted the beginning of the playthrough to still be somewhat difficult. I felt that if I got these easy 70k runes and 5 Dragon Hearts at the start of the game, I would have been over leveled for some of the bosses and wouldn't really be able to experience some of the more beginner dragon incantations. But I feel like now is a good point to get some more levels before fighting Radahn. This Great Rune boss fight is not bad. Once I've reached him and he stops shooting arrows at me, I get Scarlet Rot on him with Rotten Breath. Then while he's recovering from his attack, I use Dragon Ice. After the second small blast, I cause Frostbite to him. I immediately follow up with a Dragonfire to get rid of the Frostbite status. I want to cause Frostbite again, so I needed to remove it first. It's also really nice that I'm still able to use my Dragon Hit Incantations while riding my horse. After some time and a few more small Dragonfires, I get Radon to the second phase of the fight. When he blasts off into space, he momentarily stops taking tick damage from the Scarlet Rot. However, once the meteor starts coming back down, the Scarlet Rot continues. With the Frostbite removed, I get the chance to use Dragon Ice and apply another instance of Frostbite to him, dealing a decent amount of damage. As I was running away from him, I screwed up the jump on my horse and fell off. I wanted to use this moment and finish him off with a Dragon Claw, but he stopped before he reached me, so I ended up just pounding the ground as he died from the rot. After fighting Radon, I went to fight a couple more dragons. Surprisingly, the Rot Dragon in Caelid is not immune to rot. It takes a couple of breaths to get the Scarlet Rot going, but once it does, we're chilling as usual. The dragon is also weak to fire, so I'll get some of that damage in as well. The upgraded versions of the breath attacks are great, but the lower level ones will still be used in the playthrough. This is because I can still use the weaker ones while on the horse, unlike the upgraded versions. Speaking of those stronger spells, let's take a look at them. So a big difference with the upgraded spells is that they allow you to use them mid-air. The additional benefit of being in the air is the increased angle I can turn. With the ones that I'm stuck on the ground, I only have about 160 degrees of movement, but the ones that let me use them mid-air allow for 360 degrees. With my new spells, I go fight Grail on the bridge. I use a mixture of dragon spells for this one. Start off with Decay, of course, then I cause Frostbite, use fire to clear the Frostbite, Frostbite again, and finally finish off the fight with a few Dragon Claws. After that, I went around the map and grabbed as many easily accessible memory stones and golden seeds as I could. I want to progress more of Ranni's quest, but I stop by the capital and fight the duo tree sentinels first. I fight them one at a time because they're annoying. I misuse my spells and end up running out of FP, so I have to resort to using my grafted dragon and whittle the rest of their HP down. Then it's off to Nokron. Most of this area is running past the enemies. Mimic Tier was easy, of course, but still fun. Enjoyed two dragonborns fighting each other. Made my way through the rest of Nokron and grabbed the item for Ranni. Then I progressed all the way through Nokstella. I realized at this point that my seals were incredibly underleveled, so I went around and grabbed a bunch of the upgrade stones to strengthen them. Made my way through the Lake of Rot after fighting the Shadow and approached Estelle. I haven't really fought Estelle much before, so I wasn't sure how the fight would be. Turns out it was easy. After getting Scarlet Rot procced, I focused on getting close to him so I could use Dragon Maw. Each bite was about 1000 damage, and I tried biting his face as much as possible. The Scarlet Rot definitely helps with all the teleportation he does. After a pretty quick fight, Estelle dies and I level up my strength enough for me to use the grafted dragon properly. No more red X. After killing Estelle, I grab a few more dragon hearts at the Moonlight Altar. There are 3 glintstone dragons sleeping off near a cliff. I'm sure as hell not fighting them all at once, so I get their attention one at a time. Pretty easy to take them all out. While fighting them, my appreciation for Dragon Maw increased a lot. The amount of damage I did biting their heads was kind of unexpected. On the last dragon, I almost fell off the cliff because I was blindly running away at a bad angle. The dragon had other plans for a fight though, so I let him die to rot. Then I fought Adula. This fight was actually faster than fighting any of the other 3 last dragons I had just defeated. With all the physical damage and probably my positioning, he never got the chance to use his signature Ice Sword attack. I feel like this type of build relies on the Scarlet Breath a lot, so it's nice seeing the Dragon Bite and Slam being so useful. Once the fight is over, I pick up all the Starlight Shards because I might need them for later stage fights. I become Ranni's consort and head over to the capital to fight the Draconic Tree Sentinel. I don't know what was wrong with me, but I was not doing this fight very well. It took me a couple of tries because I'm not really good at fighting on the horse. He ended up killing my horse and I finished the fight on the ground. I took a detour to Mount Gelmir for 2 more dragon hearts. First Mamaga Worm I fight is before the gods get noble, and it goes down just like the rest. Then after killing the gods get noble pretty easily with Rot and Frost, I head back to the outside of the mountain to grab the other worm's dragon heart. After that little detour, it's back to the capital for Golden Godfrey. This was a pretty sloppy fight on my part. I couldn't really get my breath attacks off without getting hit. Godfrey's input reading would make him charge at me as soon as I started an animation for an attack. I started off with fire, but switched to magic breath once I noticed that it was doing more damage. After tanking a bunch of damage, he went down and I quickly moved on to Morgott. This fight was also easy, but again I was sloppy. I was taking a lot of dumb hits, and I think I must have just been off my game at this point. Anyways, I was able to do a lot of frostbite damage and switch to fire breath for the last half of his health. I almost died to the grab move because my rolling was so garbage at this point. It was a rough first attempt, but I'm grateful it was just one.
I was hoping my terrible dodging would have ended at Morgott, but it continued on to Mohg. I tried using Decay Breath a few times and he wasn't getting the status effect. Didn't realize till later that this version of Mohg is immune to Scarlet Rot. I switched to Dragon Maw instead because I knew physical attacks would be best. By the time I got him to half health, I only had one flask left, so I wasn't doing a good job mitigating the damage I was receiving. Dragon Maw was doing a lot of damage, and it was getting me close enough to him where his trident swings would actually just go over my head. After Mohg, I progressed through the mountaintop to fight Commander Nile. Grail's Roar was pretty helpful to start off the fight since there were multiple enemies to be hit and the knights would get staggered. Once the knights went down, I was able to beat Nile pretty easily with Decay and a bunch of flames. Grab the last piece of the medallion and set out to grab the last of the dragon hearts. First is the Great Worm in the consecrated snowfields. Now, I checked the wiki for some weaknesses from time to time and noticed the Great Worm had a very strange weakness to octopus. At first, I wasn't seeing what they were getting at. I tried one more time, and even though I had Decay on him, the octopus creatures were definitely putting in work. Once they had both died, I only needed to cause Frostbite to finish the fight. Last Dragon Heart is from Borealis. Besides the Frost Scream attack Borealis does, it's just another dragon fight that I can overcome with a few face bites. After killing Borealis, I wanted to max out my spell slots, so I went and grabbed the remaining memory stones. Since I was already grabbing items, I decided to snag the Cerulean Bubble Tier, which will be pretty nice for FP sustain. Now I was ready to fight Fire Giant. Start off by barrel stuffing him with Decay for extra damage and Scarlet Rot proc. Then I spend the rest of the first half getting as close to his leg as possible and spamming Glintstone Breath. Once the second phase starts, he actually loses the Scarlet Rot status effect, so I work on reapplying it. Once I've done that, I again try getting close to him and use more Glintstone Breath. The fight overall was pretty quick. I got the Bubble Tier for this fight specifically before I realized it did not work the way I had thought it would. If you don't know, the Cerulean Bubble Tier eliminates FP consumption for some time. So any spells I will use will not drain my FP. For some spells, this means that I can continue to cast them indefinitely until the effect ends and FP is used again. Apparently, the dragon spells do not work this way. Even though FP is not being consumed, it only allows for 2 bursts before I have to reset. Once the kiln is lit, I end up in Azula and prove my strength versus the dragon mini-boss. I paused on Azula and traveled through Deeproot to defeat Fia's champions. After steamrolling them, I went into Fia's Dream and challenged Lansseax. I don't remember this boss being as easy as it was. I took out a third of his health just trying to apply Rot. Once I did, it only took a couple Glintstone Breaths to kill him. Back in Farum Azula, it's time for my least favorite boss fight. I begin applying Rot to the Noble and only him. I really just wanted to focus on taking one down. Once the Rot starts ticking, I switch to Frostbite. Apostle kinda steps in the way, so I get some extra damage in there. Once Noble falls, I focus on having one-on-one fights for the most part. I repeat the same steps of Rot and Frostbite until Apostle dies and switch back to Noble. I wasn't doing a good job applying Rot the second time to Noble, so I stopped trying and used Dragon Maw, which actually did a crazy amount of damage. I finished both of their health bars up with Frost Breath.
This fight was a night and day difference compared to my Lord of Pots build. This was my one and only attempt on Dragon Mimic. After the duo, I progressed through the area and finally grabbed the armor I wanted for this playthrough. The Drake armor looks super nice for this build, and it even has some dragon wings on the back. Reading the description of the armor also makes it more fitting, since it states that the Drake Knights were partakers of the communion and spent their lives pursuing the strength of dragons. Now that I have my new fit, I kill another ancient dragon and head over to Malekith. There are not many chances for me to use my fully charged attacks in this fight, so I either have to use a small blast or attempt to fully charge it, knowing that I will get hit in the process. Just like Fire Giant, when the cutscene plays and the second phase starts, Malekith loses his Scarlet Rot, so I have to reapply it. I then took a few hits and was so close to dying. I had no flasks left, so I couldn't take any more damage. I managed to dodge his charge and end with a 180-degree Dragon Maul. So far, I've been doing a good job taking out bosses on the first attempt. For Lansseax, that was not the case. My first few attempts I was getting obliterated. I had no idea where to stand, how far I could be away from his blast, and when to start attacking. Lansseax is very resistant to status effects, so it takes a lot of Rot Breaths and Frost Breaths for these status effects to proc. After 4 runs, I had a tactic. After I move out of the first lightning field, I use a fully charged Decay. Lansseax will start roaring and 3 more lightning fields will start appearing at my location. Once the third one appears, I can leave the radius and start using another Decay. Somehow his wing boosted me up even higher while using my attack. Once Rot was finally applied, I ran behind him and started using Freezing Fog. He reached the health mark where he curls up, but that doesn't prevent me from doing damage to him. I use another Freezing Fog while he's teleporting and get the Frostbite to proc. Afterwards, I'm forced to dodge a large amount of attacks. The Rot falls off at about 1/4 of his health, so I switch to Dragon Maul for the remainder of the fight. Once again, I run out of flasks while being near death and barely avoid getting killed as I defeat Lansseax. With him dead, I can use this boss soul and purchase the last dragon spell I need to complete my collection. From here, I go to the Ashen Capital and take out Gideon. Nothing special about this fight cause it's Gideon. Next big boss is Godfrey, and he took a few tries but wasn't overly annoying. Just like all the other fights where I can, I use Decay until the damage starts ticking. Then I slowly started to use Freezing Fog until the Frostbite occurred. There was only like one move I was able to use my breaths uninterrupted, and this was the fissure attack he would do. Other than that, I had to do little blasts here and there to whittle his health down. Once Frostbite was applied, I used Dragon Maul, which caused about 2,000 damage. When the second phase started, I ran back a bit out of his range and sprayed a full Decay at him. I was lucky enough to have him kind of walk around for a second and not straight up assault me. I'm pretty sure with the health he had left, I could have dodged for the rest of the fight and killed him safely, but that's kind of boring. So instead, I got close and personal with 2 more Dragon Mauls. Now with Godfrey dead, I went to go kill his son. After suffering through 3 invasions, I made my way to Mohg. Now, this fight was incredibly irritating, but not completely because of the boss fight. For whatever reason, my recording stopped during the first attempt at the fight, so the footage of the fight was non-existent. I can recall what I did during the fight, so just imagine that's what's happening on screen. Started off with Rot and Frost, of course. Once those 2 were applied, I used Dragon Maul a lot. I used the Purifying Crystal Tier to prevent getting destroyed by his second phase transition. Using Dragon Maul during the animation also helped with a lot of damage. Once the second phase started, I slowly used Freezing Fog for Frostbite again and finished the fight with Dragon Maul. When I got my recording to start again, I challenged Rykard. Now, I'm fighting this boss a lot later than you normally would, and that's for a good reason. This boss sucks. I tried to fight this dude multiple times earlier in the playthrough and was losing my sanity over it. If you don't use the provided weapon for the fight, it's an absolute slog. I tried to approach him from so many ways and nothing was working. Tried keeping my distance and using breath attacks, tried staying close and using physical attacks, tried a mixture of the first 2 methods. I felt like I didn't have enough healing flasks as well as FP flasks. There was also one attack I couldn't do anything against. It It was the one where he buried his head in the ground and erupts the ground toward me. You can't run out of it and you can almost never roll out of it. It was making me so angry, I tried looking up how to avoid the attack, and everything I found on that specific attack just said use a shield. Like, the only way to deal with this attack was blocking as much damage as you could. Then, for some reason after looking that up, he would always start with that move. I feel like in other playthroughs I never saw that move, and all of a sudden he started using it every fight, even though I approached him from different angles. After Moog, I felt like I was strong enough, so I used the same tactic I attempted earlier in the playthrough. First is Rot Breath, followed by a short Freezing Fog. I use Small Blast because that's all that's needed to cause Frostbite. Then I would wait and dodge easy attacks so I could follow up with the Dragon Maw. Once I saw that the boss was no longer Frostbite, I used another small Freezing Fog to reapply. I did it this way to conserve as much FP as possible. I basically repeated these steps minus the Dragon Maw usage for the second phase as well. Following a lot of running around, he finally died. I'm sure I could have approached this fight a better way, but for the life of me I couldn't figure it out. From here I went to the Howling Tree. Fighting Loretta wasn't bad. Besides the normal attacks I usually use, I really wanted to make use of the Ruin spell, so I tried using it a lot and even defeated her with it. I decided to switch the order of the final fights this time and challenge Malenia first. I certainly died a decent number of times, but it didn't take as long as I thought it would. I decided my strategy pretty early on. It just needed some tuning after a few attempts. So let's get into the good attempt. First attack on Malenia is Grail's Roar. Malenia is knocked over pretty easily, so if I time the attack right, I don't have to worry about her counter-attacking. Once she's been hit by that, it's Freezing Fog time. I tried doing the trick where I look away as I start the attack and lock on while attacking. This trick is supposed to stop her from dodging out of my attack. I'm not sure if it works on breath attacks or I was doing something wrong, but either way it wasn't hard to cause Frostbite to her. After that I got to just the right distance where I could use Dragon Maw without her attacking me. I only used one attack because she would typically use Waterfowl Dance directly afterwards. After baiting it and running out of it, I would spam as many Dragon Maws as I could because she would consistently get knocked down. When I finish the assault, I replenish my FP and reapply Frostbite. 2 more Dragon Maws and I start the second phase. The Flower move offers the perfect chance to use an entire breath attack. I can cause Frostbite again, so I use that, but it takes a lot more hits to proc it. Once I finally caused Frostbite, I was hoping she would be low enough to start using her Flower move again. Took a while of running before I figured she wasn't low enough. Went for a pretty risky Fire Breath a couple times in order to push her to Flower Threshold. After she starts using the Flower move, it's just a matter of keeping distance until she uses it again, and going for Frostbite and a few Dragon Breaths. I screwed up dodging some attacks, and surprise surprise, I'm one shot with no flasks left. The last flower is used, and I spam some very risky attacks and finish the fight. Overall, it was 40 minutes from the first attempt to the last attempt, so not bad in my opinion. The final fight of the game had me struggling for a good long while. Trying to get through both bosses with my limited resources was already going to be tough, but the added realization that I would not be able to use my go-to rod attack on Elden Beast made it even worse. Or so I thought at the time. While editing this, I went and watched a few videos where people were destroying Elden Beast with Rotten Breath. Because I knew Elden Beast couldn't be afflicted with Scarlet Rot, I just decided there wasn't really any point in using the attack on him. But in that thought, I completely forgot that these attacks do a nice amount of damage on their own, as well as the extra ticks of damage you get when barrel stuffing large bosses. Instead, I only used physical attacks, which wasn't the easiest way to fight him. Even though I didn't end up choosing the most optimal way of killing the boss, I think it's alright. I've been using Rot the entire playthrough, so it seems right using something else to kill the very last boss. Anyways, let's go over how I complete the run. Radagon was honestly the most annoying part of the attempts. I started with Decay for some easy damage over time. With Radagon's resistances, I need a full attack to land for the status to proc. Whenever this happened off the start, we were good. However, Radagon has a move where he basically negates or deflects spells. Most of the time, he would negate a tick of the Rot Breath, and that would be just enough to prevent the Scarlet Rot proc, requiring me to get another small blast in. This is why the fight was hard. Openings for attacks seemed so incredibly limited. Once I applied the dot, I spent a lot of time dodging and waiting for moves where I could counterattack with my Flame Breath. After trading a few blows, I beat Radagon and had about half my flask left. Before the next fight started, I popped a Starlight Shard so I could gradually restore FP. Starting the fight with Elden Beast, I run behind him and use Dragon Maw. At first, I didn't have enough FP for a follow-up, but the Starlight Shards replenished just enough where I could get in another hit before he ran away. Except this time he didn't run away. He starts attacking immediately, which was actually perfect. With the extra attacks, I was able to do enough to stun him, allowing for even more damage. Within about 30 seconds, he had less than half his health left. Once the large initial damage was dealt, I needed to spend some time waiting for easy moves to counter, like his projectile slash attack or most melee attacks. Eventually, the last Dragon Maw was dished out and the playthrough was complete. There were a few fights on this journey that had me losing it, but overall the challenge wasn't bad. There were definitely boss fights that were trivialized by the dragon attacks. Thinking back on the run, I kind of forgot about the grafted dragon. I could have easily used it for Renala when she was one shot, instead of restarting the entire fight. Most of the dragon spells had their use, and it was nice to have an assortment of breaths. The Rot Breath was easily the most effective attack for the playthrough, and I'd say Freezing Fog and Dragon Maw were close behind. Final level was 135, and here are the other stats. An enjoyable experience all around, and I would recommend using the dragon moves in your builds.